Many images pop up in your head when you hear dystopia, from post-Soviet era cities to war zones to modern infrastructure to current social policies. I could go on and on and on. It's an antonym that is very personal to oneself. But for me, when I think about dystopia, I think about the story and atmosphere that was going to originally be used in Half-Life 2. Before the bright but bleak environment that Half-Life 2 takes place in, there was a concept of Half-Life 2 that was going to be a lot, and I mean a lot, darker. Literally and figuratively, such as the Combine's oppression being much more obvious, like them poisoning the air, and the Combine draining the oceans and subsequently Earth's resources more obviously. If that doesn't sound bad enough, I'd like to warn some of my viewers first who might find some of this sensitive to them. This video might be very sensitive for some, and it touches on a lot of subjects like child labor and oppression, so if that's something you don't feel comfortable with, I'd advise you to stop watching right now. Okay, we good? Alright, let's continue. Although this version of Half-Life 2 was never finished, it is still loved by many people in the Half-Life community. And it's easy to see why, because the concept art created for the early build for Half-Life 2 and the art eventually made by fans of the beta are really impressive and captivating. And for a certain subsection of the Half-Life community that think that Half-Life 2 was a bad successor, yes, those people actually exist. For them, this was a better version of Half-Life 2. The reason for this could be is that Half-Life was less focused on characters and had a larger variety of enemies, while in Half-Life 2 there was a lot more focus on establishing characters and creating a large bond between the characters and the player. This can be seen through Alex and Eli. Valve wanted to create family bonds within the game, which would make you care about a character like Eli, being the father of your close companion, Alex Vance. This gave your objectives more purpose and made you care more about the world and the characters rather than making you go from point A to point B because scientist number 5 told you to. While this did create a more character-focused story and a subsequently shorter game, for many it removed a very interesting concept for Half-Life 2. From the dark and rainy City 17 to the dusty and abandoned wasteland to the air exchange, everything just seemed to be unique, mysterious, and quite frankly mystifying. But what I think resonates most with people when talking about the beta is the sheer lack of hope this version has. In retail Half-Life 2, the Combine is an oppressive force, but its presence is less obvious. Sure, they stand around holding guns, stun batons, and harass citizens, but that's nothing compared to having marches in the city, poisoning the air, and making you wear gas masks. Half-Life 2 beta just captures a level of despair you don't see in most media. It is probably one of the most perfect dystopian totalitarian environments ever envisioned for a game. Maybe games like Metro Exodus, Fallout, and Wolfenstein come close. And this is what fascinates me most about the beta version of Half-Life 2, the combination of dystopia and totalitarianism. So today I want to explore the fascinating atmosphere and concept that was the dystopian and totalitarian hellscape of the Half-Life 2 beta. Dystopia is rather easy to explain. It can be seen as a society which is incredibly terrible to live in, and it more often than not scares you to imagine yourself in that place and society. And it's mostly subjective, to be honest. Totalitarianism, on the other hand, is more unique and complex. Some might refer to it as extreme authoritarianism, where everything from private to public life is controlled by a dictator, and where the individual and group is oppressed by the state, and where free speech is outlawed and everything is controlled through state-controlled media. But for there to be a totalitarian system in the first place, you need to match a few criteria. As former national security advisor under Jimmy Carter's administration and political scientist Zbigniew Brzezinski described and defined as 6 supporting characteristics. 1. Guiding ideology. 2. A one-party state. 3. State-sanctioned terrorism. 4. Mass control of weapons. 5. Mass control of communications and media. And finally, 6. A directed and planned economy. All of these can describe the environment that you would find yourself in while reading about Half-Life 2 beta, and playing the fan-made mods and unfinished maps from the beta leak. One of the first things you see at the start of any Half-Life 2 beta modification or story is the propaganda of the console and the Combine. It's literally everywhere. You can't ignore it. It is something that Half-Life 2 still kept during its development. On the other hand, the main ideology that Breen promotes is obedience and the idea of perfection of one people, namely humanity as a whole.
During the 21st century, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics tried to promote the Soviet man, or the Homo Sovieticus. This was an attempt to create a conformist set of beliefs within the population of the former USSR. To set the society up to be obedient or have a passive acceptance of everything the government imposed or told them to believe and do in the USSR. It created a tendency to follow everything the state says and its assessment of reality. It promoted an immense amount of chauvinism, causing anyone who actively believed in the ideology and system to look down upon anyone who criticized it. And this also caused many people to be fearful of outside influences, especially from the West. But it also sought out to create a vision for the future of humanity, when true communism was reached. The final stage of human evolution where none suffered and everyone could be happy, where we live in a post-scarcity world where there is unprecedented scientific development. In the words of Leon Trotsky, man will make it his purpose to master his own feelings, to raise his instincts to the heights of consciousness, to extend the wires of his will into hidden recesses, and thereby to raise himself to a new plane, to create a higher social biological type, or, if you please, a Superman. Kentucky Fried Communism. This falls in line with both the populist and utopian speeches you hear from Breen and the Consul. Breen talks about overcoming human instincts, thus changing what it means for us to be human, and in his vision creating something similar to like a superhuman or Superman that has overcome all its flaws. Although the Consul talks more about obedience and talks to the citizens in City 17 how they should act in society. I have no doubt if the original beta concept was made for retail that the Consul and Breen would have combined these two characteristics. No pun intended. The most obvious thing is the lack of opposition that takes place to Combine rule before Gordon Freeman arrives. In the train station, people don't talk to each other in the open, in fear of being harassed by Metro Police. More than anything, the population feel more inclined into joining civil protection to gain access to better food. I mean, why would you rebel against a system that provides you with safety, work, and food, even if little? While life might be depressing and short, at least you get to survive. And if you do choose to rebel, you go outside the cities because in no way do you set up a base of operations within City 17 or any large industrial sector large enough to sustain a large rebel presence, because you would be spotted really quickly. Have you ever considered why there are no animals outside of birds in both Half-Life 2 and the beta? Well, that's because all animals are either dead or in Combine captivity. Birds, because they can fly, are harder to catch by invasive giant creatures than any other ground animal, like cows or pigs. And the Combine probably don't have time to go bird hunting while they're destroying a planet for its resources. So yes, in the end, the dinosaurs won. So either be oppressed inside the cities and at least have a decent chance of survival, or live on very limited resources outside Combine control where starvation is a looming threat and constantly being hunted down by Zen creatures is just a fact of life. So the Combine have established themselves, through the Consul, the perfect one-party state that is the sole governing body around the globe that can claim legitimacy after the 7-Hour War, for taking care of Earth's remaining population and shielding them from outside dangers and feeding them lies about the common utopia that is just around the corner. Terror within the Half-Life universe doesn't really need an introduction, especially with the Combine. At the start of Half-Life 2, you can already see this played out with the Metro Police, not allowing any citizen to take any items with them to prevent them from having any personal possessions outside of essential things like food and the drugged water that makes you forget past memories. They also send people to Nova Prospekt to be locked up without trial if they are deemed suspicious, and they also constantly raid apartment blocks for dubious charges. But in Half-Life 2 Beta, they straight up polluted the air with toxic gases to make it more breathable for advisors with the air exchange, to the point where everyone needs to wear gas masks to breathe properly. This level of terrorism is unprecedented in human history. This is chemical warfare not used on a battlefield but on a global population. This would make it impossible to live outside of Combine control, because you would need extra canisters to refill your gas mask, which is not easy to find in the wild and most likely need to be made in Combine factories. Thanks to this, you now have no choice but embrace and accept the oppression of the Combine to even live the life you have, because without this system of terror, you most likely won't survive. It's almost perfect, and I'd think it's beautiful if I was dead inside, but all I can feel is just dread, writing, and thinking about this. The ones with guns rule. This is really a statement that can hold up in any society. If you have the right to bear arms, you can defend yourself not only from the people that want to harm you and your property, but also from a tyrannical government. The Combine know this very well, so after the 7-Hour War they confiscated Earth's weapons and used it for their own purposes, and combining it with Combine technology. This leaves little access to weapons for the average human living outside of any remaining urban or industrial centers, let alone inside them, because the command controls the production of armaments. So the humans that can survive outside the cities are left fending for themselves with the small amounts of weaponry they have left. And most of that is probably broken to the point it's left unusable, and we are not even talking about the rarity of ammunition. During collectivization in the Stalin era of the USSR, the NKVD was tasked with confiscating the weapons of peasants most affected by this policy, thus making way for them to be left defenseless during one of the most oppressive periods in the USSR's history. Nazi Germany in turn loosened its gun control for loyal followers of the NSDAP, and made gun control stricter for people they deemed undesirable, particularly the Jews, because in their eyes they weren't deemed trustworthy enough. What does this mean for gun rights in our current nation states? I don't know, and I'll leave that up to you to come to your own conclusions. It's no secret that the Combine have a monopoly on media. The first interaction you have with the Combine in retail Half-Life 2 is through the massive screen where Breen welcomes you to City 17. When you eventually step outside the train station, Breen is again on his screen talking to the citizens of City 17, and later you see him talk about the same thing on repeat on a television screen in an apartment building. This reminds me a lot of former Eastern Communist regimes, where a lot of media was repetitive and filled with obvious propaganda, to the point that the people started to resent it, and it added a lot to the revolutions in 1989. A similar representation could be seen like this in Half-Life 2 Retail, where rebels tore down a Breencast from a pillar simply because they've heard enough regurgitated propaganda coming from the same dictator promising utopia. The beta even went further than this by having propaganda posters placed all around City 17 and other Combine-controlled areas. At least, these propaganda posters were more direct and more obvious than in Half-Life 2 Retail. Free press is non-existent. Most newspapers you can find are before the 7-Hour War or shortly after, when the Combine started clamping down on free press and media, which makes the last use of this sort of freedom at least 20 years old. Although the Combine control almost all radio and communication devices on Earth, rebel and outsiders of Combine control can still communicate through radio. Although it is not known if the Combine are aware of this or not, but any sort of television or broadcasting into Combine-controlled areas are either being jammed by the Combine or the rebels are simply not doing this to prevent detection by the Combine. But to have mass media control, you need an economy to sustain said mass media. Which brings me to... Private enterprise and small businesses are nowhere to be found in Half-Life 2. It is highly possible that a black market exists, but it is nowhere to be found in retail and in the beta concept. But the mod Dark Interval does explore this idea. In a command or planned economy, the only way to get what you really want is to go through the black market. The reason for this is that in this sort of economy, the government decides what is produced and how much is produced. And this could cause shortages if production quotas are not met, or are made to be set lower so the amount of food, clothing, and consumer goods in general is kept at a minimum for the average citizen. You can see this in the beta and retail, where the clothing looks old and worn out by most citizens, and where the people stand in long lines to get food. It's not that the Combine can't produce more food and clothes, it's simply that they don't want to, because it keeps the citizens in a desperate and weak state. Not to mention that the citizens in the industrial areas are never seen producing any consumer goods. They work on Combine technology, and sadly enough the children are tasked with creating horrors beyond human comprehension, but never do we see them working on clothes or even producing weapons. This makes me believe that the Combine simply put people to work to exhaust them, and preventing them from rebelling against their rule, because they would be too exhausted to even rebel. Not only would life be exhausting and miserable, the average citizen never thinks about their place in society, and never comes to terms with the fact that what they are doing is not natural and can be changed, because the Combine does provide them with safety and a guarantee that everything you are doing now is secure and is not threatened by radical change. You can extrapolate this to real-world societies, where people work long and tough hours just to get by and never question the system they live under. And those who do question it are simply told that this is the best system we have and that it won't get any better, even if you try to do something about it. But, of course, you know that this is a lie, because eventually the people in the world of Half-Life 2 Beta did realize that fighting for a better life is worth it. And that things can change only if they come together and make the change happen, not through peaceful ways, because the Combine won't just step down, but through revolutionary means, and by forcing the Common Elite to either step down, die, or leave Earth entirely. Eventually proving that no matter how oppressive a regime is that there are always people fighting for a better world, and that eventually all form of oppression will be proven untenable and unrealistic in the end.